Hello, I'm Dr. Brian Hoskins, and I'm here today with Professor Virginia Charter. We're from Oklahoma State University in Fire Protection Safety Engineering Technology. We're here to talk to you about the International Code Council and how they develop and propagate their I-codes. This is a continuation of our series on the different codes and standards within the realm of fire protection and safety. So we're going to talk today about the I-codes, the Icc. What is the International Code Council? How does the International Code Council develop their codes? How are the I-codes then adopted? And how are those codes organized? So, first, what is the International Code Council? Well, the International Code Council is a nonprofit organization dedicated to developing codes and safety standards for people at home, in school, and in the workplace. In other words, they're trying to keep people safe, really no matter where they are, but especially in locations where people frequent. The vision is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of people by creating safe buildings and communities. Very much a focus here on the buildings and community aspect of it. Their mission is to provide the highest quality code standards, products, and services for all those concerned with safety and performance of the built environment. And they do this through their 15 I-codes and other standards that they have developed. So the common codes that you're going to see include the International Building Code, the International Existing Building Code, International Fire Code, International Mechanical Code, International Plumbing Code, and International Residential Code. All of these, by their names imply, we're dealing with places, buildings typically, and the threat from fire and other hazards in them. Now, they have a wide variety of codes. There's 15 I-codes in total. And so while those others are the most common ones that you'll see, these others do appear, especially depending on which jurisdiction you're in and which issues most directly apply towards you. Now, the listed Icc standards really come about when the I-codes have an issue that they need some technical reference, some guidance beyond what necessarily falls within the code itself. And so because of that, they first look for, are there other codes and standards out there that will provide them with what they need? Sometimes they'll reference, for example, the NFPA codes for fire protection systems, but other times, as we see here with this code on accessible and usable buildings, they didn't find one that they thought really met the needs of the code. And so because of that, they developed a standard that then the I-codes could reference. Now, the Icc is an organization that's found throughout the United States and really throughout the world. The Icc has chapters within every state and within many countries throughout the world, and these chapters allow people in the local area to communicate freely about issues that are going on with them and the codes and standards arena. So these ones are then broken up into different interest groups. Just using as an example, Oklahoma. There's the Fire Marshal Association of Oklahoma, Oklahoma Building Inspectors Association, and so on, as we see a few others listed on the screen there. All of these groups allow people with similar interests related to the I-codes to be able to communicate and share information about what's going on within their purview of the codes. Now, the I-codes also have different committees that help, technical committees that help to put together those codes and standards. The people who serve on these committees have to have the knowledge and competence in their field in order to participate. Now, there are no other requirements as far as what their qualifications have to be explicitly. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most outstanding people ever in their field, but people who are interested and have enough competence to be able to serve and represent their point of view on the committee. Now, there are a variety of different interest groups that make up the Icc technical committees. We have design professionals and consultants. So these are people who their job is to design the buildings, design the systems that get used within them. they have a place, and there's place at the table to bring up their concerns and thoughts as they build this consensus document. We have trade association representatives, so the ones who have different installation or other type activities that they do, they have their own voice on this technical committee. Builders and contractors, the ones who are more going to be using the products as they put them in there, they have a say to make sure that, yes, what's being put in there is feasible for them and something that is realistic and possible to do. Manufacturers and suppliers have a say as well, and that this helps know what products are out there, what's the state of art in the field, as well as making sure that by having a balance of representatives that we don't get too much sway by one particular influencer on the committee. Then there's the government agency representatives. So this is your fire marshals or building inspectors or other people who, work for a government agency and are there. Their primary role is these are the people that have to ultimately make sure that everything is properly installed, maintained, what are the inspection requirements, how is it that these agencies view it as what meets their needs to be able to adequately protect their communities. We have industrial officials, so these are more the electricians, plumbers, and other trade type people, as well as then anyone else who's qualified to sit on the committee is allowed to serve. Now, no one group can make up more than a third of the committee, and like with the other we've seen with the ANSI process on that module, as well as with the NFPA process and their module, there is this committee wanting to have not too much dominance by one, so no more than a third of the committee from any one interest group.
Now that we understand what the International Code Council is and their mission and vision, we're now going to discuss their cycle on how they actually change codes or implement changes to the different codes. They utilize an 8-point continuous cycle. And the very first step in this cycle is going to be the submission of actual code changes to an existing document. Anybody that is of interest of that area can submit different code changes. And typically what happens is the ICC will put out an announcement notifying of the deadline submission for those code changes for that particular cycle of that version of the different I codes that we're looking at. Once those code submissions or those code changes are submitted, they will then get posted to the ICC website typically, so that way then anybody can again review the different proposed code changes. All of those proposals are required to be posted 30 days prior to the public hearing, which is the next phase in the cycle. After the code changes are submitted and posted for 30 days, we then move on to the step in the cycle of public hearings, or sometimes known as the committee action hearings. Within the committee action hearings, they are considered open meetings where anybody can participate. There's no cost of attending. They're also even viewable through webcasts. And the hearing has 3 main steps. There is the floor discussion. This is where each code provision or code change that is brought forward is discussed on the floor. And it starts by typically, maybe it's the individual or the group or organization that submitted the code change will discuss the reasoning why they support the code change, and then there's a chance for rebuttals against that. So maybe it's the people that may not be for the code change and why the code change shouldn't be implemented. And so there's that time for discussion where people can discuss the different points, whether there's a reasoning why the code change needs to be submitted or not. And then from there, a committee action is taken. So those of the individuals that sit on the committee are able to take an action in regards to that actual code change. And then to keep the process as open as possible, there's then what's known as the assembly action. And so if someone wants to refute why or some reasoning against what the committee action was taken, and the committee can vote either to keep the code change as submitted, to maybe keep the code change with some modifications, or they actually deny the code change. And so during that assembly action, that gives a second round of voice for maybe those individuals that are not on the committee. After the committee action hearings, we then move on to the step 4 of the code cycle, which is that those public hearings are then posted again up to the ICC website, so you can kind of stay involved. You can see what's going on with different code changes throughout the cycle. You can see how they are posted, and those results have to be posted for at least 60 days before the final action hearing that occurs approximately 2 months after those original actions are posted. And so then from there, we start looking at the public comment on those different actions that were taken by the public hearings. And so now that they've been posted for 60 days, the code action hearings were posted for 60 days, we can then have public comment on those results. So again, it gives that another chance to discuss why they may support or not support the action committees and what they chose to do. And they can actually challenge the different things that occurred during the initial hearings. The next thing that happens during the cycle will be that those public comments are then posted and distributed. So you can tell that the ICC attempts and goes forward with all sorts of transparency, which is important, so that way everybody understands what's going on throughout the code cycle and the changes within the code and why those changes were occurring. And so there's again that chance for those public comments to be posted and to be read. And so those again, the code changes that are commented on and the codes that have been successful for assembly action are reported in the final agenda, and they have to be posted for 30 days prior to the final action committee. And so from there, if there's no further comments or the assembly action on the proposed change, it will be voted on by a simple majority in the final public hearing. And so here we start getting to one of our last steps, and this is where we do the final action hearing. And this is where it's important to understand some of the differences on how voting works in the development of the I-codes. Here we note that there's eligible voters that vote on those the final action, and it's important to understand that the ICC utilizes a governmental consensus process, and so the individuals that are able to vote on it are typically those that represent the authority having jurisdiction. While the committees that work together may represent a variety of interests, the final vote is completed by those that are part of the authority having jurisdiction type interest group. The final action hearing again is open to everybody, but it doesn't allow proprietary interests to influence outcomes. That's an important aspect again, and that's why a lot of times, or why they've moved towards utilizing the governmental consensus process. And again, similar with the other committee or hearings, they'll utilize webcasts so you can see what's going on in a live feed. And so then from there, the final step is getting that new edition published. And so that new edition is going to come out. The next edition of the I-codes normally includes all those final actions on proposed code changes. The cycles are normally split between 2 groups to alleviate the workload, but they're published every 3 years on a consistent basis for the I-codes.
So we've talked about the process of how the ICC develops their codes, but now we're going to more shift into how are these codes adopted. Throughout the United States, actually in all 50 states at this point, and in many countries throughout the world, some or all of the I-codes have been adopted. Also, some federal agencies use some of the I-codes as well. And so they're documents that are very widely used and are ones that are important to understand what they're doing and how they interact with all of those other documents. Now, the I-codes have to be adopted, as I said, by the state or by a federal agency, which means they have to be done by the code year. So as we've talked about, it's a 3-year cycle. So a new edition comes out. The legislators, be it the city council, state legislature, sits down and decides ultimately, are they going to accept this new code as the law for their city and state, or whatever their municipality is, or are they going to instead modify it, and with those modifications change the code to add in things that are pertinent to their jurisdiction that may not have been needed everywhere in the country, or may not have met the minimum consensus requirements, but the local AHJ views that is, or legislature views that is something that their state or their county or their city needs to have, therefore everyone to be following. Now, the I-codes also work with other agencies. It's important for the codes to have that harmonization process. We talked about the Icc Module to make sure that what one code is saying is not radically different from what others are saying. It is not necessarily the case that every code will align 100% exactly, but they should be in general agreement on especially the major issues, as well as incorporating in the requirements from those other codes. We mentioned earlier in this module about the Icc standards that come about when they can't find a existing standard that meets their needs. Well, part of this interregulatory relations is working with, for example, the National Fire Protection Association to use their standards within the I-codes. And specifically, NFPA and Icc are working together in a coalition to help bring those codes more in compliance with each other. Now, as far as the structure goes for the I-codes, chapters 1 and 2 are administrative, giving general information about the code, what it covers, and then definitions. And then after chapter 2, there is no common theme between all of the different I-codes. At that point, it's up to each of the committees to determine what should be chapter 3, 4, 5, and so on. And so it will vary from one to the other. Now, these codes do have, as I said, chapters, and within the chapters, there are different sections. Now, when you get that I-code and are trying to navigate through it, there are some helpful ways to find information. Obviously, if you start with the index or table of contents, those are ways to guide you to the right section. But then when you get there, there are other pointers that help you understand what the different information means, or what are the important things to pay attention to. For example, the terms that are defined in chapter 2 are going to be in italics. Also, we'll see an arrow indicating where a section has been deleted or removed. A vertical line means that something has changed from the previous edition. And then the Icc uses an asterisk to say that a table has been relocated, and a double asterisk indicates that the table there previously was somewhere else in the code. So while these are not the same as the indicators used in some other codes and standards that exist, within the I-codes it is consistent, and it's a way to help you navigate through these documents. So as our takeaways, first, what is the Icc? Well, the Icc is an independent organization that develops codes and standards, specifically looking at safety for people in homes, school, and their workplaces. The Icc develops their codes through an 8-step process that involves the public, but also ultimately relies on the government consensus process of those AHJs voting on the final adoption of the proposed changes. Icc codes are adopted locally by each given jurisdiction. The Icc, even when the code gets published, they cannot say now everyone has to follow it. They cannot actually force anyone to follow their code. It's up to then those local jurisdictions to vote on it and say they want it applied to their city, county, state, or country. And how are the Icc codes organized? Well, there's chapters 1 and 2, which are administrative, and definitions. After that, it is organized into chapters for different key concepts that then get broken down into sections that can help navigate through the code as you try to find it. Within the code, you'll see indicators that'll tell you where new information is, information that's been deleted, as well as things like definitions that you may want to find elsewhere. So that concludes our discussion on the International Code Council. Thank you for watching this module.